the insurers, for reasons that are completely arbitrary, decide that they're no longer going to insure it. So, Mr. Speaker, that creates hardship, as I said, to a great number of people in our communities. And the one that really got me, though, Mr. Speaker, was a young fellow who was insured. He had been insured for $700. I should say young. He's under 25. He had a clean driving record, with the exception of a ticket, I think, Mr. Speaker. And he had a 1991 van. Now, when he bought it, it was inspected, but the paint was peeling, so he decided that he was going to find some cheap paint and paint the vehicle, which he did. Well, Mr. Speaker, he made a mistake, because when he painted it, and you may have seen this case in the paper, he painted it with tiger stripes. And in order to get insurance, the insurer asked him to send in a picture, and when he was getting his insurance, and they, on the basis of the photograph, decided that the van had somehow been modified, and therefore they were going to attach a different cost to the auto insurance premium, and in fact, in the end, decided, I believe, that they were not going to renew it at all, based on that and based on the age. The young fellow quite sensibly offered to paint it back to its original color. The insurance company said no go. And Mr. Speaker, this was this is a vehicle that's worth $1,000. It doesn't have a tape deck. It's safe to be on the road, according to the government of Nova Scotia. I certainly haven't done any inspection of it, but his original insurer wouldn't insure it, so he started to phone around, and on a $1,000 vehicle, the best price that he could get was $1,900. And they told him in the end, look, you're better off, selling your vehicle and getting another one, and having a newer model than it is trying to insure, because when you look at the cost of insurance over the next number of years, it's going to be cheaper for you to sell the one you have and buy something else. And you'd say, well, that's part of what it is to be younger. You're put in a different place in the premium pool. Mr. Speaker, this has a serious effect on communities, because this young man, among other things, was a volunteer firefighter. So it has an important impact on the life of the community. These are the kinds of stories that we're hearing all the time, and I did a resolution today, Mr. Speaker, that said that there was a young man that said between auto insurance premiums and tuition fees that he was going to be paying through the nose until he was dead. That was the quote that was on the card that was returned to our office. And I think that kind of sums up the frustration that people feel with these exorbitant auto insurance rates. And I think it also sums up the frustration with the government and their seeming inability to be able to deal with it. Now, Mr. Speaker, the government, for its part, over and above this bill, has introduced a kind of consultation process. They have a book called The Road Ahead. And The Road Ahead sets out what the government sees as the possible alternatives to the existing system. But you know something, Mr. Speaker? The one thing that they never discuss in The Road Ahead is an independent, not-for-profit auto insurance company, Mr. Speaker, one that would provide the public of the province with the fairest and lowest auto insurance rates, because it would not be in the business of paying out dividends to shareholders who, unlike the other companies, shareholders, as you know, Mr. Speaker, that for the most part don't live in this province, and might I say, Mr. Speaker, for the most part don't even live in this country. Their concern about the auto insurance rates and what it is that consumers in this province are paying, simply doesn't exist. They don't care about it because that is not the business that they are in. And I know the Minister of Finance will remember my story about the Ford Motor Company versus Henry Ford. I remember one day he got up and stormed out of the. I told this story. He got up and stormed out of the House. That was in, I think it was in '98, Mr. Speaker, the minority. And I never did understand it, but he seemed to be quite offended by it. But it was a good story, and some things bear reporting, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the case, the Ford versus Ford Motor Company, is a very interesting one because it sets out the reason for the existence of corporate entities. And it was a very simple little case. It was Henry Ford, who had was manufacturing cars. He decided at one point in time that he had simply made enough money, that he had made a good dollar off of the product that he was selling, and of course he wanted to continue to make money, but he wanted to do something else as well. He wanted to lower the price of his cars, to lower his price of his vehicles, so that everybody could afford one. And he wanted to pay his workers more because he thought that they should share in his prosperity. This is a fairly progressive view for a guy who was also known, incidentally, Mr. Speaker, to have some not so very progressive views as well. But that was a fairly progressive view. So he went ahead and did that, and the shareholders of the Ford Motor Company, Mr. Speaker, sued him. They sued him because they said, you are damaging our rights as shareholders to make the maximum profit off of our investment. And you know something, Mr. Speaker, this might sound astounding, but the reality is that the United States Supreme Court agreed with the shareholders, and they called Henry Ford a menace. They said he was a menace to the shareholders because the sole purpose of a corporation was to make a profit for their shareholders and to maximize the profit for their shareholders. And that's what that case stands for, Mr. Speaker. And we sometimes lose sight of the fact because we have, by legislation, brought about many different kinds of regulation that require that companies and that corporations, especially the large multinational behemoths, I think they were referred to earlier, that they comply with a certain standard of conduct that is consistent with what we would expect in a civilized society. It's not that they want to do it, Mr. Speaker, it's because they have to do it. And you should remember always that many of the companies that serve us very well in this country have practices in other countries that, Mr. Speaker, are less than laudable. And that was the point that I made, and I never did understand why the Minister of Finance got up and stormed out. I was simply giving him a broader understanding of what the purpose of these multinational corporations were. It's not a matter of debate, Mr. Speaker. It's a matter of historical fact, and that's what I was trying to impart to him that day. And I think that it was worth repeating because I think people that the case is the same today. Although I will say, of course, there are many people involved in these very large corporations who I think because they move to these communities. And I know in my own hometown in Liverpool, there was a man who came from England and who worked in the and some that members opposite would know well, who came to live and work in Liverpool and stayed, and always argued what was in the best interest for the town of Liverpool and the county of Queens, and I think gained a very wide measure of respect among all people and who know him and who had the opportunity to either work for or with him over the years. Mr. Speaker, he's retired now, but so we know that of course these individuals exist in all organizations. But the fundamental fact is the purpose of the corporate entity is to make and to maximize the return for their shareholders. And we should never lose sight of that, because it is an interest that is adverse to the interest of the consumer. The consumer, in this case the auto insurance insurer, of course has an interest in paying the lowest possible rate for the product that they want. So these are the opposite ends of the spectrum. In this province, Mr. Speaker, auto insurance is a compulsory product. If you're going to drive on the highways or the streets of this province, you must have auto insurance. It's a requirement, and it's required for good, sound public policy reasons. So we don't take issue with that at all. It's an appropriate and proper policy. The reality is, Mr. Speaker, if you're going to make a product compulsory, you must also make it affordable. And that's where the problem lies with this government, with this piece of legislation, because this piece of legislation does absolutely nothing to make the product that is compulsory affordable. Now, we look around the country, we look for examples of where they do have affordable and fair auto insurance premiums, and what do we see? We find that the lowest and fairest auto insurance rates exist in the provinces of Manitoba, Saskatchewan, British Columbia. 3 provinces, Mr. Speaker, that have very different products.
Good interview on CBC this morning.
Manitoba, for example, has a pure no-fault system. They have the lowest rates in the province, or in the country, there is no doubt. They, in fact, have had a rate freeze for 5 years, and in fact, as I heard in the interview this morning, they repaid some $80 million to consumers in the province of Manitoba. The only increases the individual from Manitoba Public Insurance Corporation said was due to rating classification changes with respect to newer vehicles that caused the cost of the insurance to go up very marginal. I think he said 7 or 8%. Very a particular system, a very reasonably priced product. Next door to Manitoba, Mr. Speaker, in the province of Saskatchewan, they have a hybrid system, where when you go down to buy your auto insurance, you can choose. You can be insured in a no-fault system, or you can be insured in a tort system, and one assumes that either your deductibles or your premium fluctuates depending on the choice that you make of the product that you want to buy. But regardless, Mr. Speaker, of which system you choose, you end up with, guess what, the second lowest auto insurance premiums in the country, second only to the province of Manitoba. Speaker, British Columbia, unlike Manitoba, which has a no-fault system, and unlike Saskatchewan that has a choice system, they are a tort jurisdiction, Mr. Speaker, much like our own. But yet, Mr. Speaker, they have the third lowest auto insurance premiums in the country. Now, what is it that all of these provinces have in common? What is it that they share? It is true they have the fortunate heritage of having had a New Democratic Party government in those provinces. That's one thing they share, but that's not it, Mr. Speaker. As much as I would say that would be a grand feature, it is not the reason why they have lowest auto insurance premiums. The reason is because they have a public auto insurer. Mr. Speaker, that is what they share in common. Unlike my colleagues reminding me that the minister responsible for auto insurance believed it was the flat roads in Manitoba that gave them the lower auto insurance. I was on my way down to Berwick.
I'm sure my car in Nevada.
I was on my way down to Berwick to a nomination meeting down there, Mr. Speaker. A fellow by the name of Greg Hubbard's running down there, a grand candidate. When I went down to his nomination meeting, Mr. Speaker, I said to him, you know something? I couldn't get over how flat the road was all the way down here. You guys in Berwick must pay the lowest rates according to the minister responsible, you must pay the lowest rates in the province.
What was his answer?
Well, you know something, Mr. Speaker? It turns out it's just not true. They have very flat roads all the way down to Berwick, and they're still paying high auto insurance premiums.
Not in the minister's riding, though.
Well, it goes right through the minister's riding. You should mention it. So, Mr. Speaker, I don't think it has anything to do with how flat the roads are. I believe that the common.
He can't be wrong.
I think the common feature is simply that there's public auto insurance in those provinces, and unfortunately for the consumers in Nova Scotia, unfortunately for the people who rely on this government for assistance, this government is not even prepared to consider public auto insurance. And the minister has said it over and over again. I mean, he'll some days I don't know exactly where they stand, but usually he says that crackpot scheme over there, Mr. Speaker, or something
From the whiners.
or something of that nature, some derogatory remark, and yet, Mr. Speaker, this is a system that exists in 3 provinces that not only provides the lowest auto insurance premiums in the country, but also creates a pool of capital from the premium revenue in the province, which is borrowed from by the government of Manitoba through bonds and is used to build community infrastructure, healthcare infrastructure, education infrastructure. Mr. Speaker, the interest that is paid by the Manitoba government, instead of going out of the country, as it does here, Mr. Speaker, goes to back to the people of Nova Scotia and the Manitoba Public Insurance Corporation. What a brilliant idea. One that we could do here, but unfortunately the minister rules it out. The other thing, Mr. Speaker, I would point out is that the actual auto insurance policy that exists in those provinces, in my view, and it's only one person's view, Mr. Speaker, but I've had a look at it, the auto insurance policy itself delivers a better and more comprehensive product. And, Mr. Speaker, if that wasn't enough, it is also based on rating criteria that are the fairest anywhere in the country. Because they don't rate you, Mr. Speaker, on the basis of gender or marital status. They don't rate you on the basis of age. Mr. Speaker, what they rate you on is your driving record. Very simple concept. You're a good driver, you qualify for a good rate. You have a poor driving record, you pay more. Very, very simple concept. One that we don't, unfortunately, have in this province. Because in this province, Mr. Speaker, if you have what we refer to as a milestone birth date, you're going to pay more. If you're too young, you're going to pay more. If you've had a speeding ticket, you're going to pay more. If you've had a ticket for not wearing your seat belts, you're going to pay more. The insurance companies are sending out medical authorization forms with the renewal forms. And if you want your renewal, you have to sign the medical authorization form and send it back to them. You know what they do? They are then, of course, because you've authorized them, legally entitled to your medical history. Whether it's all your medical history, whether it's relevant or not. Mr. Speaker, this is unbelievably invasive, and I believe it smacks of an industry that has lost touch with the people who they are supposed to serve. And primarily it is because, Mr. Speaker, they have ceased to be insurers in the true sense and have become financial institutions. They have converged, as I understand the lingo is today. They really are looking at various ways to maximize investment revenue, and the premiums that you pay and the insurance product is only a small part, and seen as only a small part of their business. Mr. Speaker, there was a time when insurance companies were truly interested in the safety of the people on the roads. And in fact, it was the insurance industry that built the first, an executive of the insurance industry that built the first modern vehicle with seat belts and may have even had airbags at the time. I don't recall, but certainly certain proper braking systems and bumpers and all that. And the insurance executive took it from auto manufacturer to auto manufacturer to try and embarrass them into building safer cars, because the responsibility of the insurers was to not only insure people, but to try to prevent loss. In this province, Mr. Speaker, there's very little incentive for the insurers to do that. Let us suppose that the largest auto insurer in this province has let us suppose that the largest auto insurer has 20% of the market. Well, Mr. Speaker, at 20% of the market, if they were to identify a dangerous intersection or a dangerous part of the highway, and let's say rather than just going to the municipality and saying you must fix this, say they actually decided to fix it themselves. They said, we're not going to wait for the municipality. We are the people who are responsible for loss prevention. We're going to fix it ourselves. Well, if they did that in this province, Mr. Speaker, 80% of the claims that would be prevented on that stretch of highway would be with some other company. So 80% of the benefit of the work they would do would accrue to other companies. Well, of course, in the world of the insurers, that's not seen as something that's desirable. So, Mr. Speaker, in provinces like Manitoba, Saskatchewan, and British Columbia, because they have to respond to every claim, it is in their best interest to see to it that these problems are fixed. And in fact, all of those insurers invest heavily in road safety, because every claim that is prevented, Mr. Speaker, is a claim that they don't have to pay. Not to mention the fact that it is an injury that is not suffered by a member of the motoring public. I see, Mr. Speaker, that my time is now drawing to a close, so it's my intention now to take my seat and to take my seat and to thank you for the opportunity to join the debate on Bill 45.
Thank you. Thank you to the Leader of the Opposition. I recognize the member from Cape Breton South.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, pleased to rise in my place here today to speak a few words about second reading on Bill 45. And I would characterize this bill, Mr. Speaker, as an election carrot, one of many that this government has been trotting out over the past few days and weeks leading up to an election. And this one is no different. It's an election carrot. And another probable statement one could make about this bill, it's a half-measure bill. It's a bill that, while is certainly a start, I guess, in down the right road and trying to protect consumers in this province, but certainly it's only a half measure. Mr. Speaker, in speaking on this bill, it goes without saying that this issue involves everyone in this province, from one end of the province to the other, and is of great concern to Nova Scotia consumers. Mr. Speaker, as recently as this morning, I had a call from a constituent of mine, a good friend of mine. His name is Donnie McLean. And Donnie called me up expressing his concerns about this particular bill. And his concern was that over the past year, his insurance rates have gone up for his car considerably, to where in the past year he was paying over $100 a month in insurance. Now, Mr. McLean is a pensioner, a gentleman who has worked all his life and finds himself on much reduced income. But I guess what incenses Mr. McLean and what he was telling me about was the fact that this bill does nothing to help him, because not only did he have to pay over $100 a month up until he got his last bill now means that he's paying over $200 a month, and this bill before the House doesn't help him at all, because his increases have already been levied on him, and he simply can't afford it on a retirement income. And I could imagine, Mr. Speaker, that you could take the case of Mr. McLean and multiply it many times from people in my area or people across the province who are hurting. I want to refer, Mr. Speaker, to an article in the Halifax paper of April 12th, in which it states that the rising rates increase in insurance premiums between February 2002 and February 2003. And it gives a comparison rate from Nova Scotia versus the rest of the provinces. And Nova Scotia is highlighted here at 65.9%. 65.9% increase in auto insurance rates in 1 year. Now, Mr. Speaker, I don't know, perhaps members of this place, members of the government, and people that have substantial incomes may be able to support those kinds of increases, but average Nova Scotians simply can't afford it. They simply can't afford to drive cars in this province anymore, and some are very frustrated about the fact that now we have a bill, as we're leading up to an election in Nova Scotia, that effectively is going to freeze rates. Well, you know, like the old saying goes, the horse has left the barn. You know, in this case, the insurance rates have already been raised to the point of intolerable increases in this province, so this is just a half measure to try to get this government through the election. And they're only going to do it until January next year. Isn't that wonderful? You know, what are we going to do after that, or what are we going to do for those people who had substantial increases in the past year? Nothing. That's what this bill doesn't address that at all. And, Mr. Speaker, I want to make the House aware, and Nova Scotians who may be watching this afternoon, that the government, as the rates go up, the government itself gets a windfall off of this. You know, and again, you know, when you talk about balancing the budget here, you know, how much of this budget is balanced on the backs of consumers who have had to pay increased rates? Well, I'll tell you, Nova Scotia levies a 4% tax on auto insurance premiums. This is in a story in the Herald of Thursday, May 1st. And it goes down to say the province got about $7 million more than budgeted from its tax on premiums in the last fiscal year. Well, the government has had a $7 million windfall off the backs of Nova Scotians who did not expect increased rates in their auto insurance. But not only did they get hit, the government got a $7 million windfall. Now, is that $7 million windfall part of that much-trumped budget surplus they had this year? Probably. But it's on the backs of Nova Scotians, along with all the other user fees that have been put on the backs of Nova Scotians since this government took office close to 4 years ago. Now, Mr. Speaker, we have all heard stories from Nova Scotians about how their rates have increased dramatically in the past year. But freezing rates until January 2004 is only a slight measure that will undoubtedly provide some relief to Nova Scotians. There's no doubting that. Those who get hit between now and that time may have the rate stayed until January 1st. What happens after January 1st? So the insurance company is not allowed to increase the rates, if I get this right, from the time this bill comes to the House, retroactive to May 1st. May 1st, until January 1st next year. Okay? Now, notwithstanding the fact that people in this province have had exorbitant increases put on them, like Mr. McLean did over the past year, that doesn't count. That increase stays in place. So what counts is from May 1st until January 1st. Freeze. So what does the insurance company do? Those that they haven't got before May 1st, they'll get after January 1st next year. So they'll just wait and send them out a bill on January 2nd. Because this government is only putting this measure to the House to try to suggest to Nova Scotians that they're really doing something for them, when in effect, this bill was never going to see the light of day in this House, except for public pressure that came on this government. Once again, this government has misread the public mood, like they did with the casino issue, Sunday shopping, with cigarette smoking in this province. Once again, the government finds itself offside with public opinion. So in a rush to get this bill to the House, they come up with a half-baked measure. Remember, anybody who has had their auto insurance increase substantially is not going to see any benefit from this bill. Only people, it's too late for them, the only people that may see a benefit, those premiums that may come due between May 1st and December 31st. Now, if one can project forward, again, I say that there's nothing to stop the insurance companies from increasing them after that date. What it clearly demonstrates, Mr. Speaker, is another example of this government preferring inaction instead of meaningful action to actually do something about this problem. Mr. Speaker, the people of this province want good insurance protection, but they also want reasonable insurance protection. They don't want to be placed in a situation where they can't drive their cars, or that they can't insure their children who are eligible to drive their cars because of exorbitant costs. Or worse than that, Mr. Speaker, worse than that, will run the risk of driving without insurance because they simply can't afford it and have to drive. I think the government, by its lack of attention to this problem, is encouraging Nova Scotians to find other ways of being able to drive their vehicles. And, Mr. Speaker, diligent efforts by all parties to minimize costs of the system will assist in promoting these conditions. But this government's inaction has prolonged the problem, Mr. Speaker. By freezing insurance rates, this government is simply using it as a delaying tactic. Tell Nova Scotians that something is coming, but you have to wait. Mr. Speaker, the waiting is now over. The waiting is now over. Nova Scotians have sent a message. Don McLean has called me and sent a message. Other constituents of mine have called me and sent a message that they are angry, that through no fault of their own, their insurance costs have doubled in this province. And Bill 45 is all the government can come up with? All the government can come up with? And I suggest to you, Mr. Speaker, that the government had no intentions of coming up with this bill. But because of public pressure in the past couple of weeks, the government has changed its mind. The government, I can tell you, Mr. Speaker, that the government had no intentions because it's set out on by establishing a committee to go around the province and ask people if they feel their insurance rates are too high. You know, that's like the postcard the NDP sent out, asking a question, do you feel your insurance rates are too high? If so, tick here. You know, do you think you should be paying less? If so, tick here, you know. I mean, what a brilliant exercise, Mr. Speaker. What a brilliant exercise to send out to people. You know, what an objective survey. You know, if you feel your insurance rates are high, tell us, you know. It's not telling them, Mr. Speaker, it's what are we going to do about it. It's all right to tell, for Nova Scotians to tell on a postcard how they feel. I want to know what the party is going to do about it and what this government is going to do about it other than Mr. Speaker, bring a half-baked measured bill to this House. And Mr. Speaker, it's not hard to get the attention of the New Democrats when you accuse them of trying to grab smoke again with the electorate. And that's what they're doing here, because they have no plan. They're sending out a postcard saying, if you disagree with insurance rates in this province, tell us. Now, I mean, what a brilliant question to ask. What a brilliant question to ask Nova Scotians. If you disagree with high insurance rates, please tell us. You know, please tell us, you know. Surprise, they're going to get, everybody's going to write back and say, yes, we disagree. But then what do? That's what we want to know.
So what's Danny gonna do? Has Danny told you what he's gonna do?
The issue, Mr. Speaker, it's not hard to get their attention. It's not hard when you expose the kind of carry-on that goes on in that party.
Well,
When it comes to any issue in this province, no answers, no solutions,
Can I ask,
just grabbing smoke, trying to grab the vote by any means. It's already a matter of public record that our party will be coming forth with a plan for this insurance problem. It will be coming forth with a plan that will mean something to Nova Scotians. That will mean something to Nova Scotians. It won't be smoke and mirrors, or won't be trying to con Nova Scotians with a postcard. They even stole the idea of the postcard from the government, Mr. Speaker. And put a postcard out because of the famous Jane Purvis postcard. They got the idea from that. But I'll tell you, Mr. Speaker, that's not going to work. Give Nova Scotians more intelligence than tick here if you agree that insurance rates are too high in this province.
This issue, we got the Liberals' attention.
The government, Mr. Speaker, could have had an insurance package ready to go during the spring session, but wanted to wait, perhaps the issue would pass. Well, it didn't pass. And because of this government's inaction, with half measures that include freezing rates and empty regulations, you can be sure that this issue will grow and will continue to grow. Because as I've said, Mr. Speaker, this does nothing for people who have already been hit with high insurance rates. It does absolutely nothing. And it does nothing for the future. What it is a bill to get them through the election. Maybe they'll get this off the front pages for a few months and weeks by doing this. I don't think so. The bill suggests that this problem is going to continue to grow, Mr. Speaker, and force many rural residents to go without insurance, who can't afford to insure their cars and also have no alternative with public transportation. So they're going to be really affected, Mr. Speaker, because if they can't afford to pay, they're literally going to have no transportation in rural area. But seniors and people with older cars, Mr. Speaker, they want some assurance that they're going to be able to drive their cars in the future. But the government tells them to wait until the fall, so we'll come in with some new legislation. Wait until after the election is what that means. Wait until after the election. It's like everything else this government is doing. Wait until after the election. With the provincial election expected to be called soon, Mr. Speaker, the government is appearing to be doing something to quiet the protests from drivers who are making tough choices. Choices that make them decide not to take the insurance coverage they need, or to simply park their cars and throw the keys away. And Mr. Speaker, with rate increases pushing some insurance payments to thousands of dollars a year, it will only continue to force people to risk driving without insurance, or again, as I said before, to stop driving altogether. And some people will either have the option to pay the rates or sell their cars because they simply can't afford it. When I get calls from Donnie McLean and other people in my area who are saying, what's this bill going to do for me? It's not going to do anything for me. I've already got my insurance rates doubled. Are they going to roll that back? Are they going to ask the insurance company to give me my increase back? I don't think so. I don't think so. It's just like some other bills here that have come before this House, or some other initiatives of the government that project into the future, like the student loan program. Nobody that's in the system now is going to reap the benefit of it. All this government has stated is that in the future there's going to be a half-measured program there again, but doesn't do anything. And I make the analogy because it's the same smoke and mirrors game that this government is playing with everything. They make you believe they're doing something with students' loan remission, but they're doing absolutely nothing. They make you believe they're doing something here with car insurance rates in this province, but they're doing absolutely nothing. They're freezing them for a few months. The damage has already been done, Mr. Speaker. The damage has already been done. The rates are far too high in this province as it stands. What happens to the insurance rates after January 1 next year? We have to ask that question. We don't know. The government hasn't projected past that date. What happens over the next few months with respect to seniors wanting and needing to get insurance coverage in rural areas? Are they going to be able to get it? What happens to those people who are already hit with high insurance rates in this province? The question is, are they going to be helped? Maybe they should be helped. Maybe a start would be to give them back the $7 million more that the government took in and increased taxes this year because of the rates. Maybe that's a start. Maybe the government could be really innovative here and say, we got this $7 million off the backs of consumers who had to pay more insurance this year. So maybe a start would be to return that $7 million to consumers in this province, instead of putting it in the balance sheet of the government and trying to tell Nova Scotians they're balancing the budget. Well, it's not hard to balance budgets when you borrow money and put user fees in on just about every goods and services that the people need in this province, including allowing car insurance to go the way it's going. This is an important issue, Mr. Speaker, in the lives of virtually all the people of this province. But, Mr. Speaker, let's go back in history a bit. It was an issue a year ago. It's not just an issue that popped up last week or this week. What popped up last week and this week was people were getting bills that were even more exorbitant than the ones they got last year, so they're starting to speak out. The government has now realized that this is a public issue. But I believe the government had an opportunity a year ago, and you hear the government and the official opposition talking about what a waste of time that would have been. But if you go back a year ago, just think, Mr. Speaker, we, as a party, advocated an all-party committee to sit down and come up with a solution. The government turned us down, and the New Democrats turned us down. So what do we get in place of that? We get a government who did nothing for 9 or 10 months except wish the issue would go away, which it didn't. So then they come in on a deathbed conversion of this issue with a bill that does nothing for anybody who's already paid high rates or increased their bill to sometimes double last year. Now, Mr. Speaker, that could have been avoided, perhaps, if all the parties had got together a year ago and come up with a plan to deal with this issue. But nobody wanted to deal with it. The NDP response was just, let's send out a postcard and ask people, do you feel that your insurance is too high? If so, tick here. Do you feel you're paying too much for car insurance? If so, do you feel it should be rolled back? If so, answer yes. I mean, what kind of intelligence do they think Nova Scotians have here? Nova Scotians are too smart to buy that kind of smoke and mirrors. On a postcard to ask questions, the obvious questions of Nova Scotians. Yeah, will the sun come up tomorrow? If you think so, answer yes. There was a lot of thought went into that program of the NDP on insurance, I'll tell you that. I think that, it must have been the member from Dartmouth North that wrote the question. But I'll tell you, the Nova Scotians aren't going to be fooled by that, because there was nothing in there to suggest anything that the socialists would do. Just what we think you should know, that insurance rates are too high. If you agree, say yes. If you agree, say, isn't that brilliant? Just check here. Wasn't that brilliant, Member from Dartmouth North certainly must have thought that one up. Haven't said anything, Mr. Speaker, about how they would cure the issue. Clearly, Mr. Speaker, the issue is a complex one, and it's a complex issue in this province. Huge rate increases, Mr. Speaker, huge rate increases in this province have made it impossible for Nova Scotians to drive illegally. Worse than that, Mr. Speaker, they have to play Russian roulette with the fact that they may have an accident. Then where would they be? Liable. And it would be a shame to see that happen in this province because of the fact that they've been driven away from buying adequate protection because of the cost. I believe, Mr. Speaker, we have to have diligent action and efforts by all parties in this House to minimize costs to the system. You know, it can't be a matter of one-upmanship, Mr. Speaker. They say one thing, they say another thing, and we're going to come out with a third plan. I think what we have to do is come to grips with the fact that Nova Scotians are being gouged here, and something has to be done about it. There's no rationale for the kinds of increases that are being placed on auto insurance carriers in this province. Senior citizens like Donnie McLean. Students who can't afford to drive anymore because of the cost has driven them away from the driver's seat. At the time, Nova Scotians called upon the government a year ago to do something, and the government did nothing. We suggested, as I stated, Mr. Speaker, an all-party committee. Sit down and come up with a solution. But everybody seemed to warm up to that I talked about, except the government and except the socialists, who don't have a plan for anything, about anything in this province. And the member from Dartmouth North keeps baying away over there, you know, not making any sense like he usually doesn't. But I want to say, Mr. Speaker, that I want to talk about rural residents again, because they are particularly vulnerable here, because there's no, you know, Mr. Speaker, if the member from Dartmouth North wants to get on his feet, you know, and do some more baying at the moon like he's been doing for the past 15 minutes, you know, he can certainly do that, you know. But I tell you, Mr. Speaker, this issue is far too important to be sidetracked with that kind of stuff. If you come up with something constructive, I'll listen. But to date, that party has come up with nothing constructive in this issue. We had a request 13 months ago, Mr. Speaker, for an all-party committee to sit down. Here we are 13 months later on the eve of an election, and the government comes in with this bill. Well, I'll say one thing for this bill. I'll say one thing for it. It's light years ahead of what they were going to do, because they weren't going to do anything. But it's far, far from the kind of bill that Nova Scotians deserve. It's far, far from the kind of action that the government of Nova Scotia should be expected to put in place regarding this issue. Nova Scotians were looking for more. Nova Scotians were looking for a government that was going to look out for their interests in terms of the costs of insurance, and for other government services, which I spoke of earlier in debate, Mr. Speaker, and on earlier motions of this House, and on other subjects that the government have been dealing with in this House. But I'll tell you, Mr. Speaker, the fact that the government is not only not paying attention to it in a meaningful way, the fact is that they're making money off it. $7 million they made off it. $7 million they've taken in additional taxes because of increases. So here we are a year later, no closer to a solution. But we know the election's coming, Mr. Speaker. This issue is still out there, along with all the other issues that the government have half dealt with in the dying days of this session of the House. We're talking about something that should have been settled long ago, not in the dying days of this session of the House. You don't have to, Mr. Speaker, you don't have to ask people in this province what's wrong. You don't have to send out a card and say, what's wrong with your insurance? People know what's wrong. They're paying too much for it. They're paying too much for it. Their costs have doubled. And that party is sending out a card asking them how they feel about it. How they feel. The NDP want to know how you, a Nova Scotian, feel about your rates going up. Is anybody going to write back and say we're happy about that? What they want to know is what this government is going to do about it. What this government's going to do and what that party's going to do about it. And, Mr. Speaker, they will find out what our party's going to do about it in the coming days. Stay tuned, I will tell the member from Dartmouth North. At least our program will make some sense to Nova Scotians and will be something that Nova Scotians will be able to rely on. If we had have established an all-party committee, Mr. Speaker, 13 months ago, we wouldn't be standing here today talking about this issue. This is just more inaction by the government, Mr. Speaker, who is comfortable with inaction. And Mr. Speaker, I just want to say, and I'm not going to misuse the time of the House much longer today, but I expect that we may be back on this bill at more depth as the days roll along. But I can tell you, Mr. Speaker, that Nova Scotians who have had their car insurance increased in the past year are angry. They're angry because they feel that nobody has come to their rescue. And it's only now the government is realizing that, oh, we have an issue here that could be an election issue. So let's get it off the election table by putting this amendment forward that would freeze rates between May 1st and December 31st. After all the, oh yes, the NDP sent a postcard out. So that alerted Nova Scotians to the fact there was a problem. As if they couldn't read their bill, and see there was a problem. They had to get told there was a problem, And if you don't agree with it, send a letter back and tell us, or send a tick here and send a postcard back. I'm going to tell you, it had to be the member from Dartmouth North. Had to be him that put that together. Because I'm going to tell you, Mr. Speaker, the sheer brilliance of the NDP to ask people how they feel about an increase. How do you feel about an increase? I'm sure they got lots of postcards back and say, oh, we're happy with it, sure. Yeah, don't bother us, we're happy, what a brilliance, I support lower auto insurance. Tick here and send it back. I support lower auto insurance. The brilliance of this document, the brilliance of it. I got to tell you, Nova Scotians, Mr. Speaker, want action on this issue. They want action from all three parties in this House. They don't want any more rhetoric. They don't want half measures. They want a program that's going to stop the increases of auto insurance in this province and in some case roll it back. The auto insurance rates in this province are too high. They're too high and people cannot afford it. And they don't want promises, they want action, Mr. Speaker. They want action. I would hope that this government will realize that and come in with a program that's going to mean something to Nova Scotians. And as I said, Mr. Speaker, they might want to start by giving this $7 million windfall they got off of the increases this year back to the consumer of this province. The Premier of this province has said, Mr. Speaker, on more than one occasion, we're going to do what's best for Nova Scotia. We're not going to increase taxes. He said that, but he did. We're not going to have user fee increases, but they're all over the place. And now he gets a windfall off the misfortune of people who have to drive vehicles in this province. I suggest it's time that this government, Mr. Speaker, told Nova Scotians exactly what they're doing here. And what they're doing here is trying to get themselves past an election. But I think they owe more than that to Nova Scotians, Mr. Speaker. What they owe Nova Scotians is an explanation of why they did not act on this issue when it first came to be a problematic issue for Nova Scotians over a year ago. Why is it taking so long for this bill to get to the House? And why is it only the half measure that it is? Why doesn't it protect people like Donnie McLean, who have had their insurance doubled in the past year, and other consumers in this province? Why doesn't it deal with the problems of those people? Why doesn't it deal with the problems of those people, Mr. Speaker? Because the government has no intentions of trying to deal with the problems of Nova Scotians. No intention. It's only when this matter is raised publicly, it's only when the matter becomes a matter of political numbers, and they've done the numbers on this, it's an issue. So they're going to try to defuse this issue, Mr. Speaker, before the next election. And also, Mr. Speaker, and I'll wind up my remarks by saying this.
Telling what Danny's going to sell us?
I'm going to say to you, Mr. Speaker, that Nova Scotians are going to be very angry at this bill.
Oh, they already are.
They're going to be very angry when they're told that, I'm sorry, doesn't affect you. You've already had your increase last year, and you have to live with that. Even like Mr. McLean's increase doubled. He's going to have to live with that. There's no relief for him, just like there wasn't any relief for university students. And I make that analogy again, who have gone through the system and now are saddled with high debt repayment costs in university. The half measure, and I say half measure because it's the same half measure that this bill is.
It's not even a half measure.
Well, maybe not even a half measure, as my good friend to my right, not philosophically, but to my right here, has said. Pardon me? You know, what I'm talking about is the analogy of trying to fool Nova Scotians into thinking the government's actually doing something for them. When in the issue of the student, they did nothing for any student. They did absolutely nothing for any student that's gone through the university system. They're projecting a half measure in the future for future university students. And this is the same thing here. What they're saying is from now until December, we're going to freeze the rates. Everybody's had an increase already. And the ones that don't, they'll be frozen all right. But unless this government comes up with some other measure, the insurance companies will put it right back on January 2nd next year.
It's already there.
So, in conclusion, Mr. Speaker, our party
It's getting warmed up.
Our party will have additional speakers on this matter. We're very concerned about it. And as I take my place, I would just say to you, Mr. Speaker, and to the government and to the official opposition, that when all is said and done, the Liberal Party position on this issue will be one that Nova Scotians can trust. Thank you very much.
Thank you. To the member from Cape Breton South. Order. 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 The member from Cape Breton Centre has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, Mr. Speaker, that's quite an act to follow, huh? But you know what? I'm going to kind of not trace rabbit tracks and kind of inform Nova Scotians because, you know, Mr. Speaker, as unlike the previous speaker who accused us of not doing anything, there wasn't a member of our caucus that didn't go out and meet with groups and find out what they had to say around public auto and around these exorbitant rates, Mr. Speaker. We did do that. We consulted, Mr. Speaker. We were face to face. We were in Inverness when we met seniors in the complex down in the town of Inverness, Mr. Village. No, we're right in Inverness, seniors complex, right in Namara Street. What they say? The Minister of Tourism says they play the fiddle there. Well, they did say this much: he was a good fiddler, and they'd stop short of anything else. But you know, Mr. Speaker, this is a bill. Bill 45 is a bill that's, you know, similar to what this government did with the Bill 1 and the firefighters. What it realized is it's not about a government that's out there being proactive. It's a government who says, "Oh, look, we have to acknowledge this. We know that these folks are out in front of us, and we have to bring a bill in now to supplant it." Similar to what's going on here with this Bill 45 regarding an insurance delay. Anybody who calls this an insurance freeze, I think, have a brain cramp, Mr. Speaker, because it's not. It's a delay. It allows. There's nothing here that says from this day hence that they will not be allowed to set rates, or after December 31st that rates can only be raised subjective to certain criteria. Mr. Speaker, all this bill says is we're going to freeze them retro to May 1 and then go out to the December 31st, which sets no regulation, no control. It's just it's the extreme wide open market that the private insurance, international and private insurance companies are left to frolic in at the peril of Nova Scotian taxpayers, Mr. Speaker. So let's look at some items that this bill doesn't or will not address. I want to talk about one in particular. It's like the representative for the Insurance Bureau of Canada says regulations aren't the way to go. We don't need a regulated industry. We don't want you to regulate the marketplace as it performs for our profits. Well, one could philosophically disagree with that from time to time if you're a little bit left of center, or maybe you want to buy into it completely if you're right of center. But what is really objectionable about IBC and their crowing is that they want regulations put on the consumer. They want you as a consumer to say, well, I'll still pay this exorbitant rate for this product, but here now are the lists of things that you cannot do. If you have a soft tissue injury, you can only get this much. So they want that side of it suppressed and regulated, but they don't want you fees you pay to them regulated. They can't have it both ways. This province, through Schedule B in your insurance, has a form of no fault already, and we've talked about that, and as it relates to certain matters in insurance. But, Mr. Speaker, the insurance companies don't want to acknowledge that they will tell us one thing, and one thing only is driving these rates through the roof, and that is litigation. Litigation as it reports to personal injury. Now, look at the CBA, the Canadian Bar Association. What are they saying? They're saying that Nova Scotia is one of the lowest areas for litigation around insurance. And the awards are the lowest, Mr. Speaker, the lowest in awards. But yet, our rates are growing exponentially. And no, they say that's it. It's the awards are putting it through the roof, Mr. Speaker. But when you say to the Insurance Association or the Insurance Bureau of Canada, substantiate for us. Tell us why you see that as being affected. Show us the litigation and show us the awards. Then they just kind of, I'll talk to you later. It's gone. It's out the window. Mr. Forgeron folds his tent and leaves. They don't really come up and tell us that here is a substantial one-for-one incident of why your insurance are going up. Here are the rates. Here are the awards. Here's why they're going up. Well, let's even take that rate idea a step further, or the litigation and the awards. When most insurance companies, it's almost an unwritten rule that if you talk to people, especially independent brokers in the industry, will tell you that insurance companies will not litigate under $12,000, we'll say. So if they're not litigating, if it's not worth their while to litigate, then what they're happening is that, you're inviting almost, if there is, just a rampant amount of leaving that gate wide open, and people are going to walk through that gate. So, and Mr. Speaker, unlike the Liberals have said that, they have not done any consultation, but I tell you, in one of my meetings I had in my role as a committee member on our caucus committee regarding insurance, I had a private meeting with an insurance broker, and I put that forward to him. I said, what about these unlitigated claims? He said, there's nowhere it's written. You'll never find it written down anywhere, but by and large, it's an accepted practice. But I said, has anybody ever really done a study to say if these soft tissue injuries were to put it in a word, bogus? So he said, there was a study a few years back, and it was in Alberta, where a few of the larger insurance companies seen a spike in these $8,000, $10,000, $12,000 claims, and they weren't being litigated. So they said, well, look, we're going to go in and start litigating. And what they found, that almost 100% of those claims all had merit and should have been paid. So it's not as the Insurance Bureau of Canada would have you believe, that it's these claims are not only costly, but they're quite possibly bogus, which is contrary to what a broker has told me. And I have no reason not to believe that broker. He had no reason not to be forthright and honest with me about these things. Another broker in my when we were going around doing our investigation on this, Mr. Speaker, an investigation which I may say the Liberals didn't do, is we went out and I talked to another broker. I talked to another broker, and he said, look, I'm retired from this business, but I was a broker for over 30 years. And he said, historically, insurance companies did not make a profit off their premiums. They made their profit off investments. So basically what that meant, Mr. Speaker, is that they weren't like taking $100 for coverage and assume that coverage would and other people that paid on their premiums would cover their liabilities in association with those with those policies. Basically what it meant is that they realized they were getting that money in the door, and then they would invest it, and the investment would take care of the premiums. So, Mr. Speaker, it goes back to the fundamental problem that we've said largely around the insurance industry. It's not really what they talk about in the impact of the amount of claims, the amount of litigation. It's investment. It's clear, unabated investment failures in this industry, Mr. Speaker, because if you follow their logic, they say, well, again, I got to go back to soft tissue injury. That's the problem. If we could put caps on soft tissue injury, then we could rectify this. Well, again, by itself, maybe that would be an argument, but it's auto insurance we're talking about here today. But Speaker, I'm sure in your community, as well as in mine, that it's homeowner insurance is just as many complaints. So why all of a sudden are they going through the roof? And it's a good thing I say the roof, because a lot of people, they'll come in and say, your roof's 20 years old, can't insure you. Your oil tank wasn't approved to put in, can't insure you. You got a coal furnace, can't insure you. Got a wood furnace, can't insure you. How in God's green earth has that got anything to do with soft tissue injury? How can they look us in the eye and say that's soft tissue injury? How does Bill 45 protect those consumers? So, Mr. Speaker, it's hard to take the IBC at their word. They've come in, and Mr. Speaker, as another part of your function around this great house is you're also chair of the Economic Development Committee. And, Mr. Speaker, you've also you were there when the members from the IBC were there, and they were, I think they were, while informative is always a good word to use, I think they were informative. I think it's always, whether you agree with them or not, it's always good to get the other side, and they laid us out a nice slide show and told us what they thought of as problems in the industry. But yet, when kind of they were put to the, when the wood was kind of put to them, they weren't as responsive in some of their answers, Mr. Speaker, and that kind of interrogation, if you will, and cross-examination of those witnesses was from all sectors, was not just from this party, but from the three parties, because it is something, it's consumer-driven, and it's important. So the IBC, while they purport to have a position and saying that regulation is not the answer, regulation will not do, that we need it, but we only need it on our side, is wrong. And this Bill 45, the delay bill introduced by by the Minister of Environment and Labor doesn't cut it. So, you know, another group here, Mr. Speaker, is seniors. You know, again, I want to go back to what I mentioned earlier about meeting with seniors. I met with seniors at the Reserve Pensioners Club. We met with two groups there at two different times. We met with 2 times. We met with seniors in Inverness County, once in Waikagama, once in the village of Inverness, and we sat down, and their seniors, especially seniors in rural areas, had told us the devastating impact of them not being able to afford auto insurance. You know, Mr. Speaker, in many areas, and I know the Minister of Tourism knows as well, that in a lot of areas we'll say Inverness County, where people have lived in the family home for generations. And some of these are pretty rural areas, Mr. Speaker, and they're I mean, pretty in the pretty sense, and pretty in, I guess, the exaggerative sense that it's far. And so those people, they're proud people, is right, Mr. Speaker. They're the finest, some of the finest people in this province come from Inverness County, and I'm more than happy to say that, Mr. Speaker. My children's grandparents are from Rocky Ridge and from Westlake.
Some will be MacDonnell's, I'm sure.
Yes. Yeah, that's right. And I say, Mr. Speaker, I didn't get what the Minister of Justice said. Yes, but I tell you that my children's grandparents are from Rocky Ridge and from Westlake, and I know the minister knows that area well. But yes, that's right. But we're not going to go off on that right now. We're not going to. Another day we'll do a tour. Maybe the Minister of Tourism will buy a bus and take us all through. And him and a Graham that I agree with. Him and the Graham I agree with, Glenn, will play for us while we travel the rocky roads of Inverness County. Okay, we'll do that, and I'll take you up on that, Minister. The Minister offered me for a tour of the riding, and I couldn't think of a more marvelous place to be, and we'll start at the Pioneer Cemetery. Sounds good. Okay, Minister, I'll take you up on that. But, Mr. Speaker, to get back to the seniors in that area, Mr. Speaker, really need transportation, because rural areas, whether it's Inverness County or Victoria County or Colchester or the Musquodoboit Valley, are areas that, you know, there's little or no public transit. So with little or no public transit, they're relied on either their own vehicle or the vehicle of a loved one to get them to very important things. To them is to get to very important medical appointments, to get groceries, to go to their house of worship. Yet this is taken from them when these people who are on fixed incomes realize that something has to give here, Mr. Speaker, that we either give up the car so we can live or we can insure the house. And that goes back to another problem, Speaker, because with the idea of some of these seniors, what they have is and I mentioned before, a lot of these live in homes that have been in the families for generations. And what happens is they say to themselves, well, okay, one of these bills got to go. The skyrocketing cost of auto insurance and the skyrocketing idea of home insurance, I've got to get rid of one. So what they do is they sometimes allow their homeowner policy to lapse, which is just an awful, awful thing to force seniors into doing. But nonetheless, that's their option, because insurance on your home isn't mandatory. But when a disaster happens, you know, they're left with nothing, Mr. Speaker, because they have really exhausted all their, all their funds they had into keeping their cars so they could get to those things that most Nova Scotians, I think, see as priorities in their lives: to get to medical appointments, get your groceries, go to your house of worship on when you feel fit to go. So, Mr. Speaker, those are things that are taken away because they do not have access to transportation in rural parts of Nova Scotia. But yet this government doesn't feel that that's important. This government think we'll give them a 7 or 8 month delay, and with no idea of what's on the horizon, that the day after, that they can go through the roof again, that it's gone. It's now we've tapped level out your insurance for some time, and that's it. And then the day after, I said it goes 50, 60%. Again, because we're dealing in days here of 60% auto insurance, Mr. Speaker. But you know, there's the seniors are just one group, Mr. Speaker, and there's whole communities. There's whole communities being affected by the discriminatory practices of the insurance industry. One of those real awful things that insurance companies do, and I've heard referred to as two different ways: redlining or red circling communities. Now, Mr. Speaker, I know somewhat of what I speak because my community is one of those ones that insurance companies have done that to. Now, that term, red circling or redlining, is a way of saying that they look at either your prefix on your phone, like 862, 849, 842, or your postal code, and say no, that you live in a high-risk area. You live in a high-risk area, therefore, it doesn't matter that you've had a perfect driving record. Doesn't matter that, you know, you've never, ever even had a speeding ticket. We, by virtue of where you live, we as the insurance company are saying, we're not going to insure you, or we're going to put you in facility. Just for the reason where you live, Mr. Speaker. You know, is that fair? I heard a lady being interviewed on CBC Radio this week, and by Jennifer Henderson, the business reporter for CBC Radio. The woman lived in Dartmouth North.
Oh, no.
And one of the reasons she was told her insurance was going up was because of her postal code. Because of her postal code is why her insurance has gone through the roof, Mr. Speaker. Is that fair? I ask you. Just because she lives in an apartment building in Dartmouth North, that's where it's gone. Mr. Speaker, where I have my constituency office in New Waterford, there was a young husband and wife had opened their own insurance business as brokers in the town of New Waterford. Now, Mr. Speaker, it allowed employment for those two plus one other person in a town that desperately needs young entrepreneurs. B, it provided a very worthwhile service to many people in New Waterford that, you know, that did not want to go to Sydney to get their insurance services and wanted to keep it within the town limits. But, you know, Mr. Speaker, they had one company that has been since bought out, Zurich. There's one underwriter who at the end told them, that's it. We're not underwriting in your postal codes anymore. So if you want to write business in Sydney, or if you want to write businesses in other areas, fine, you can stay open, but you can't be writing business for these postal codes or these phone prefixes. So that was it, Speaker, that they had basically had put a small broker in a town that needed that employment. They had put that broker out of business, Mr. Speaker, so not only were these consumers without a local representative to go to, Speaker, but they killed 3 jobs in an area where 3 jobs mean a lot. They took away the revenue that the person that was running the premises away from them. All these ancillary things. Was that decided in Nova Scotia? No. Was that decided in Toronto even? No.
Where?
That was decided in Switzerland. It was decided in Holland.
No.
Where we have no control. This government and its predecessors have not done anything to protect the consumers in this area. But you know, now we're without those jobs, we're out that income, we're out those resources because governments didn't react, because governments allow areas of this province to be discriminated against. There's nothing in Bill 45 that tells insurance companies that rates in New Waterford got to be as fair as they are, and the criteria has to be the same as they are in Spryfield or in Clayton Park or in Chester or in Hubbards, wherever, Mr. Speaker. Or Yarmouth, wherever, Mr. Speaker. There's nothing there. Yet, you know, we'll hear the minister tell us, you know, that this is a great bill, that this is what's needed. Well, him and his cohorts over there are probably the only people that think that this bill will do anything but delay the inevitable. There's nothing in this bill, not one thing in this bill stops the insurance companies from their usual shenanigans. There's nothing in there that stops them from redlining communities. There's nothing in there, not one thing, that stops them from putting a driver in facility. There's nothing in there that stops them after a birthday, humping somebody up into a new category. There's nothing in that bill that says when your car gets a year older, we're going to give it to you again. There's nothing in Bill 45 that stops insurance companies from doing that. There's absolutely no protection. Yet the minister will bold-facedly stand up in his place today and tell us this is the bill. As he's done with Bill 1, he's done with Bill 45. He's introduced a bill in this House that's not proactive for the people. It's just what it is. It's kind of like an illegal block in football here, Mr. Speaker. It's kind of holding downfield. So just delay till you get to the ball. Only in this case, Mr. Speaker, the ball is the election. So yes, Mr. Speaker, you know, it's almost a Statue of Liberty play as I see the pose over there. So, Mr. Speaker, those are some of the issues, and there's many more here that I'm going to talk about in the next short while of why this bill is not anywhere near adequate to protect the consumers of Nova Scotia. You know, now I want to get to this farcical idea that the Liberals have brought up about the all-party committee. Now they've come and told us all that this is the panacea. Now this is purported just before now, Mr. Speaker, that the previous speaker, the member of Cape Breton South, who I had sat on a committee with, said, well, when we were trying to set the committee up, had said, well, this committee's useless anyway because the Tories are going to have the majority, so all-party committees don't work. But he now has this idea. He's done a complete circle on this and said, oh no, that the all-party committee works. Now, so I guess it worked in New Brunswick. I guess the all-party committee worked in New Brunswick, or, oh no, I don't think it did, because I think the Liberal leader in there is now disagreeing with what came out of that all-party committee in New Brunswick. I'm not sure what his position is today. You know, a grame is a grame is a grame, so I don't know. So maybe maybe they'll have another view tomorrow. But you know, and it's like, you know, it's this idea. If you'd listened to us last year on an all-party committee, that we'd have it now, that it would be fixed. Well, you know, in May 1995, a select committee was struck in Newfoundland. You know, Mr. Speaker? Then they restruck it in 96, and then they submitted a proposal in 98, and then from 98 to 2001, they did some more research by government staff. The government polled public opinion, Mr. Speaker, in November 2001. And in February 2002, government polled public again. In 2002, the government reports 1,077 submissions received. So, Mr. Speaker, these were all, that was, and the minister just saying the Liberals are doing that. He's absolutely right. So, Mr. Speaker, this is a committee that is almost 8 years in the making. 8 years. And they're telling us that you know, their idea of an all-party committee, if we had struck it when they asked for it, that would be the resolve. That we'd have everything. Well, that's an 8-year-old Liberal committee, headed committee that really does not do anything, and that's what it is. It's like that's where we're at with that, Mr. Speaker. So, you know, this idea of Liberals calling for an all-party committee of the House to look into insurance, you know, they kept saying, well, we've got a plan, we've got a plan. I mean, you know, as much as I disagree with the government on this, Mr. Speaker, at least for the past year and a half, they've been engaged in the process. They haven't been the outside looking in. And we, you know, but the third party, all of a sudden has, I guess the leader, neighbor candidate decided that it's time to enter the fray. So, you know, if you want an 8-year committee to study insurance rates, support the Liberals. So, Mr. Speaker, that's the horrific side of our idea of an all-party committee. Yeah, that's right, Mr. Speaker. So, you know, the idea of I've heard a sore point over there, Mr. Speaker, because the Richmond boy is whining. So, Mr. Speaker, let's talk about the idea of how this government has made out over skyrocketing insurance, Mr. Speaker. And there is, in fact, here the idea that they have made, you know, $7.1 million in increased revenue from the 4% tax on these skyrocketing insurance rates. And the Minister of Finance is quite bold about them, Mr. Speaker. And here's what the Minister of Finance said in August of 2002, Mr. Speaker. Basically, this is a reflection of a phenomenon that we've seen in the insurance industry. And he noted the province hasn't raised the tax rate on insurance premiums. Well, they shouldn't have to, because the stuff is coming in buckets fulls, Mr. Speaker. It's the type of money that would come in here that would make the mafia blush. But, Mr. Speaker, this government has no problem with that. And not only have they seen windfalls directly from the 4% tax, they've not only made a windfall off of that, Mr. Speaker, they've also have a windfall here from drivers' abstracts. Now, Mr. Speaker, consumers get this problem here in two ways. First of all, for those who may not know, a driver abstract is basically it's someone who calls the Department of Motor Vehicles and finds out what your driving record is and so on, if you've had any tickets and moving violations and so on. It's all in there. Now, on March 1, 2000, the fee was raised from $7 to $15. Now, there's nary a increase or a renewal of an insurance policy now that the insurance company doesn't call down to DMV and request a driver's abstract because they're looking for a way to milk more money from you. So, first of all, the consumer gets it this way. The consumer gets it because that $15 is obviously going to go into your policy some way. They're going to put it in there. You don't see it in there, but it's that right off the top, the $8 more over the $7 is going to be cost. But I want to take you through some numbers on that, Mr. Speaker, and the impact of that increase. From March 196 to April 196 to March 31st, 97, the revenue fees collected for driver insurance abstract financial information was $1,489,299, $300. In 97, 98 for the same time period, Mr. Speaker, the insurance abstract, they requested $220,000. They collected $1 million, $1.5 million. In 98, 99, it was 1,400,000, round numbers, Mr. Speaker. But then when we get into the increase of fees, we see a dramatic jump. We see a jump of over $1 million, of $2,700,000. Then we see another jump in 00 to 01 of $3,210,000. Then, for the year of 2001, 2002, we see it up over $4 million. So, Mr. Speaker, and then from December 1, 2002 to December 31st, 2002, which I don't have the up-to-date version to the end of March, Mr. Speaker, but that was up to $3.5 million with still a quarter of the year to go. So my idea is that I think they're going to beat the record of $4 million. So, Mr. Speaker, these are all revenue increases. They were all revenue, that's over a $3 million increase in 4 years, Mr. Speaker. That is money that could have been invested for insurance premiums to come down, Mr. Speaker, that this government could have helped. Yet it's money they say they have for balancing the books, but really what it is, it's money they're gouging from Nova Scotians. And that way, like I put forward to you, Mr. Speaker, it's a twofold way of gouging the consumer. It's gouged by your government, by raising the rates and bringing revenue up and not telling us. And it's gouged because the insurance company makes that increase and puts it into your premium without you really noticing it, Mr. Speaker. So, you know, it's a can't win for the consumers, Mr. Speaker. That this government has burdened us yet again. So, who's one of the groups that really, you know, like we know the frontline group as far as the consumer goes, that bears the brunt of this is actually the consumer, because they have to pay this price. But another group who's out there that are bearing almost the harassment side of it are the independent brokers, the truly independent brokers, Speaker, because some people, you know, companies would have you believe that they're independent brokers, but really they're not. They're confined to just certain lines of business that the large insurer sells, Mr. Speaker. And I'm talking, these independent brokers come out, and it's people that you have maybe dealt with all your life. Maybe you've had the same company all your life, and all of a sudden that you have to, you call them up and you notice this year your rates have gone from $500 to $2,000. And you're going to give them an earful when you call them, because that's the person you see as your insurer. You really don't know that it's Royal Sun Alliance or it's ING or it's Monex or whomever. You just see it, or Economical, any of those big companies. You just see your broker, and a lot of people take that heat out of the broker. And it's not, the independent broker has no bearing, or he can't bow to the pressure of these large companies. They tell him what the rates are and who to insure. Because as I said to you earlier, Mr. Speaker, we saw when a company like Zurich was on the go, what it did to a small broker in my hometown, Mr. Speaker, where it forced them to close. And this is the international power wielded on a small company in a small town in New Waterford. So these are the people call up and say, you know, my rates are going through the roof. What am I going to do? So this is unbelievable. This is what they do. I want to, you know, the idea again of the insurance company and not the IBC in particular not wanting regulations just is so baffling to me, because they want it all but give up nothing for it, Mr. Speaker. Yet, you know, we see this. Now, let's talk about, you know, the timeline on the government here, Mr. Speaker. Now, this government has been pretty lackadaisical. Everything it's been asked to do, it's been dragged kicking and screaming to this, Mr. Speaker. They've not come to this, you know, in any way as a willing partner. They've, you know, spring of 2001, you know, there's consumers and insurance underwriters are insurance writers starting to inform the public that the rates are going up, Mr. Speaker, and does the government react? No. And then there's you see in the fall of 2001 a particularly big increase, especially around, you know, the ones with what we would call less than perfect risks, like students and seniors. And they begin to notice enormous increased premiums, Mr. Speaker, some as large as 300%. And, you know, we see this, we react when consumers start telling us, and then we ask the government in the late fall of that year to react, and, you know, it really does nothing. Then, you know, we, through the member from Cole Harbour, Eastern Passage, Mr. Speaker, sends a letter to URB asking to review the rate changes, Mr. Speaker. Then myself and a month or a week later, myself and that member call for URB hearings into skyrocketing insurance. But what does this Premier do? He rejects the request, Mr. Speaker, because I would submit to you it's a philosophical bent that this Premier has, that why hurt big industry? Big industry and big insurance are our friends, and why should we go? We should let them go unfettered. But, you know, Mr. Speaker, there comes a point when even this government has to act, and due to, you know, mounting pressure from ourselves in this party, and public outcry, then the then minister decides that he's going to refer it to the URB, saying the board would examine rates to determine if they are excessive, inadequate, unfairly discriminatory. I don't know how you can be unfairly discriminatory. To me, discriminatory is discriminatory. But that's the minister then, and or otherwise unreasonable, and the board may order an adjustment, Mr. Speaker. You know, Mr. Speaker, and then later on in the spring of that same year, Stats Canada's index begins to show sharp spikes in the cost of auto rate insurance, Mr. Speaker. Then, you know, we see another huge jump again in rates in August of 2002. Then, I said earlier, then in August, the finance minister releases his quarterly statement showing the government would have slipped into a deficit. It hadn't received a $7 million windfall from 4% tax and insurance premiums, which, you know, that's where it's at. It's an insurance on, it's the consumers of Nova Scotia, and then, you know, that $155 check looks pretty inadequate when you look at this $7 million increase, Mr. Speaker. But, you know, and in September of that year, Mr. Speaker, the auto insurance industry, the hearings get underway. And then we, in March of this year, Mr. Speaker, once again, our party reveals that StatsCan figures showing auto insurance in Nova Scotia rates went up by 65%. Now, you know, the minister says that the NDP are saying this. Well, of course we're saying it, but Mr. Speaker, this one here, this is not our numbers. These are Stats Canada's numbers, Mr. Speaker. And I would wish that the learned minister would take time to really look at this issue, as opposed to being flippant when people ask him questions in this House and saying, oh, no, that's wrong, that's just the NDP saying. It's not the NDP saying it. It's Statistics Canada telling us these things. Then, you know, Mr. Speaker, and unlike the Liberals, we've moved forward. We've already, in March of this year, we after a consultation with some from major groups, right, from Yarmouth to one side of this province to the other, we've put an interim report together and talked about what we've heard. And the first part of our report dealt with prices. And we showed a price comparison right across this country, Mr. Speaker, and showed that where prices were best, where it was driver-owned insurance. So, Mr. Speaker, you know, for these other parties to stand in this House today and say, you know, what have you done? You know, we can lay substantive questions. We can tell you where we met with groups we've met with and where we've traveled throughout this province to ask these questions. So you know, it's not a matter in this House of you know, us not having a plan. I mean, for the unmitigated gall for the Liberals to stand in this House and to say we're going to have a plan, when they basically stood on the sideline, like you know, and then told us, all of a sudden Danny sends over a letter and says, look, we got to get in the middle of this. So you know, you know, talking about things that won't wash with the public, Mr. Speaker, and that the guy, the Johnny come lately to this dance. The Johnny come lately to this dance is going to go home without a date. I'll tell you that much, Mr. Speaker. You know, that this you know, that there'll be you know, you know, Mr. Speaker, I certainly hope they got a friend to drive them home. So, Mr. Speaker, you know, let's look at another part of what's happening in Nova Scotia around, you know, the inactions around trying to help Nova Scotians. Let's look at from April 1, 2002 to March 31 of this year, Mr. Speaker. 2,700 people in this province were convicted of driving without insurance. Now, that's part of a question I asked the minister in question period today.
What did he say?
And he was, you know, well, I have great admiration and respect for that minister for his years in this House. You do? He's, you know, he's never ever answers a question substantively. He will give you a flippant answer and make up some kind of gesture, just. Well, I'm all ears.
He's the president of the Flat Earth Society of Nova Scotia.
That was a good one, Mr. Speaker. You know what? I'm going to say that, you know, because not very often does Minister of Finance, he may look funny, but he never says anything funny. But, you know, I said, I'm all ears, and he said, I thought you were all mouth. And so I thought that was pretty good, you know. I got it on the record, too, Mr. Speaker, you know. But again, you know, Grace has often told me she laughs at him, too.
Order, please. The collegial atmosphere is appreciated, but it's a little digression from the bill. And the honourable member of Cape Breton Centre has the floor, and he's doing a great job.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And any time you can get any member of that front bench to be engaged is a victory, Mr. Speaker. So I'm happy for that. But you know, I want to get back to 2,700 Nova Scotians were turned into criminals in this province because this government gave them no choice. They said, look, we rolled the proverbial dice and said, I'll take my chance of getting caught and see what happens because it's cheaper. Now, Mr. Speaker, let me say right here and now that that's not a position that my party supports, that I think I can speak for all three parties on this one, that there's not a member in this House believes that that's the right thing to do, is not to have adequate insurance or have up-to-date insurance on your vehicle and on yourself that would make you eligible to drive in the province of Nova Scotia, because that is not, you know, we're not saying that in any way, shape, or form. What we're doing here is informing the public if that's what's out there. These again, as I said before about stats can numbers, these are real numbers that you know, these aren't NDP numbers, these aren't Tory numbers, these aren't Liberal numbers. These are numbers presented to us by the Department of Justice in this province, and the minister's here, and he could back them up if he wishes, Mr. Speaker. But these are, and what that also represents in 5 years, Mr. Speaker, is a 45% increase in rates in this province, Mr. Speaker, and that is, you know, just a huge increase. And you know, these statistics, Mr. Speaker, aren't I want to go back to, I guess, part of an answer that the minister gave me today and said, well, we've had those happen from time to time, Mr. Speaker. Well, you know, again, as I laid out to him, it's a 45% increase in 5 years, Mr. Speaker, and what we've seen is when the timeline I'd given you before is from 2001. It's a steady growth. You know, Mr. Speaker, in the years 98 to 2000, they had leveled off somewhat, Mr. Speaker, but there was steady growth it went from 97, 98 year to 1800 to 2200 and 64, and then it fell the following year to 2247, and then it starts its increase, Mr. Speaker. 2460, 2619, and 2737, 2,737 people convicted of driving without insurance, Mr. Speaker. Those are devastating numbers, Mr. Speaker, because, you know, I don't know what the ratio is, but I'm sure that there are, and we'll use the insurance industry as they use numbers to project outwardly, Mr. Speaker, actuaries and so on. They take a number and they use it. So they certainly could exponentially say 2,700 people out there caught probably represents X amount or more that are out there without the coverage, Mr. Speaker. Okay, so that's what we're saying, Mr. Speaker. There's that. We don't know without a study of how many more people are out there. But you know, Mr. Speaker, could you imagine the devastation that would happen if either if either side of a party there was in an accident that if the person who was uninsured had a serious accident, you know, I suspect that argument can be made any accident is serious. But what I'm saying, Mr. Speaker, beyond a fender bender, I'm talking about maybe something as disastrous as a fatality, Mr. Speaker, and what ruin that could bring to that person's life without having adequate insurance and being taken to the system, Mr. Speaker. But you know, we have not really delved into that in any way. Again, I say we didn't get the adequate answers we were looking for today in question period regarding these types of statistics, Mr. Speaker. It's you know, the other problem around this in this province, particularly too, is how the insurance companies get their increase. You know, there's really it would be like if we ever ran our household like this with little kids. I think our homes would be in a sorry state if every time a little kid, one of our children, come in and said, "Mom or Dad, I want some money," and then we say, "How much?" and they'd say, 20 cents, and you give them 20 cents, and they come back a while later and say, "Mom or Dad, I want some money." Well, how much? 50 cents, and there's no questioning of where that money's going or just giving it to them. Well, that's the type of system we have here in Nova Scotia. No, in Nova Scotia, when it comes to insurance companies, they send a note over to the URB and say, "We're jacking rates up, effective this time frame. It'll be 20%, we'll say, for renewals, 30% if we're going to write new policy, Mr. Speaker." And it's all it is. It doesn't even have to, they don't have to even give a reason why. But even with that said, even in provinces like Alberta and Newfoundland and Ontario that have prior approval, there's really nothing. There's nothing there. They just go in, and it's more of a delaying tactic. But they, by and large, get what they want, Mr. Speaker. That there's never been a rollback of any real proportional means to say, you know, that we're not going to do this, and we're not going to allow you to do this, and so on, Mr. Speaker. And you know, one of the other provinces that's quite different is Quebec. Quebec has a kind of a mix between a public and private auto, and it's a hybrid type system that certain brokers say, look, that should be looked at, and it's one that should be looked at. But it's I guess I go back to the minister's position of one point that this government has said, no way, no how are we going to look at public auto. No way, no how. Even though our first report showed on prices, and that's where we looked at, on prices, the 3 provinces that have the lowest rates are driver-owned public auto, Mr. Speaker. That is Saskatchewan, Manitoba, and BC. And with them, they have a mix to look at. They have a lot to offer. You know, Manitoba, while I'm not a fan of no fault, Manitoba has public-owned no-fault insurance. Saskatchewan has the mix, and BC has the full tort system, Mr. Speaker. And so those systems are all to be looked at. They could, but yet this government, because I would say has a philosophical bent that says no, that won't work. No way. We're not going to look at it. No matter what that means for consumers, we're still not going to do that for you, Mr. Speaker. We've eliminated that, and so therefore it's off the table. It's off the table, and you know, yet they will. What they will do here, though, with insurance companies, they'll take they'll take the windfall tax money they get from them. They'll take the windfall tax money from them and spend it where they want. They'll drive the rates up at the driver's abstracts, and they'll take that and go with it. And they'll allow the international insurance companies to take their money offshore and not to invest it at all in Nova Scotia. And that's where I think the public funded auto sector really comes in with the type of logic that we have to look at here, Mr. Speaker, and that's reinvestment in our province. You know, we have hundreds of millions of dollars being reinvested in the economies of Manitoba, Saskatchewan, and British Columbia, and you know, all that while that we're keeping rates low, it has an effect that, you know, that we could be, if we had that type of revenue with roughly the same amount of driver population, we could be doing something substantial in areas like Cape Breton and investing in the economy there with our own money. As previous speakers from my party have put forward, Mr. Speaker, it's revenue that's put into real driver safety programs, Mr. Speaker, that they've seen areas of where they have a high propensity for accidents and they're repaired. You know, Mr. Speaker, we wouldn't still be kicking the ball around on what to do with Highway 101, Mr. Speaker. If we had that type of revenue, we wouldn't be going with cap in hand to the federal government. If we had that type of industry or that type of capital, Mr. Speaker, we could be going in on our own and making we would be saving lives on some of the dangerous stretches of highways. Mr. Speaker, there also is a debate, you know, while I know that the idea of Highway 101 is always one about safety. I'll tell you another road we could be investing in, and that is the 125 Sydney bypass is often referred to, Mr. Speaker, because again, there's been studies from TPW that says that, as a matter of fact, is the most dangerous stretch of highway in Nova Scotia. So we could be investing in safety for our residents, Mr. Speaker, but yet this government, just because of a philosophical bent, says, no way will I look at, or the minister says, no way will my government look at driver-owned insurance. I don't believe in it. I don't care how good it's for the province. I don't care how safe it'll make the roads. I don't care what type of income it'll take in here for us to invest in industry and economic development. I don't care. It's more important that companies in Copenhagen and in The Hague, that they take our money and enjoy it over there and don't reinvest it in Nova Scotia, Mr. Speaker. That is fundamentally wrong. Bill 45 says nothing about that, Mr. Speaker. Says nothing about making insurance companies be responsible to the people of Nova Scotia, Mr. Speaker. Indeed, this bill does nothing to make this government responsible to the people of Nova Scotia. It's a delay bill. It's delay until such time as we can get it, hopefully get it by the electorate, hopefully for such time as that this government sees itself as quite possibly they would want to get themselves reelected, and we're going to try to fool people. So, Mr. Speaker, you know, it's not going to happen, Mr. Speaker. This bill doesn't take the muster, Mr. Speaker. That this is a bill that is only going to hurt the driving public of Nova Scotia. What it's going to do, it's going to delay a rate, and you know, Mr. Speaker, soon as they lift this rate, that the insurance companies will, they've got the paper and the fax machine ready to go on 12/01 on January 1st. That it'll be sent over to URB and saying we're raising our rates. We would have raised them 50% last year if we hadn't had an election, and we're going at her. So, Mr. Speaker, that's what we need. We need fairer insurance costs. We need lower insurance costs, Mr. Speaker. This is not what's happening with this government. This government is giving us a part-time tax delay, and it's not going to work, Mr. Speaker. Thank you very much.
The honourable member for Cape Breton Nova.
Mr. Speaker, I propose to speak until 6, and then after an appropriate adjournment of half an hour to resume. Now, that seems to excite my friend from Kings North. I hope when my speech is finished, he'll feel even more excited.
It might encourage him to speak.
Well, it might even. I think it may perhaps encourage him to write in Thursday's Daily News. But we'll see. We'll see. Well, I'll put the Arabic textbook away and start speaking English for a while. Now, what I was going to speak about, Mr. Speaker, was the topic of insurance and this bill. And I think I should begin by paying tribute to the Liberal Party for the great work that they have done in making this an issue and in bringing this to the forefront so that this bill is now before the House. I hear the NDP laugh. The NDP laugh whenever they see the Tories in power. I know that. I know that. But I don't want to get distracted by the laughter of the NDP. I want to stick to the bill. Now, Mr. Speaker, the Liberal Party brought this issue to the forefront. I can't give you an exact date, but it was approximately 2 years ago. It's approximately 2 years ago. And the suggestion at that time was that an all-party committee be established so that the NDP would be in it, as well as the PCs, as well as this party, and that all three could work together to pool their respective resources and find a common solution. Well, that was the idea of the Liberal Party. What did the NDP say to that? They said, oh no, we can't possibly, never, 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 never. Heavens forbid. Shocked and appalled. And after they had gotten over the Shocked and Appalled Act, there wasn't much more they could say except, no, we don't want. We won't participate. Out with it. So that was the response of the NDP. And as for the Conservatives, well, they looked to the NDP to get a cue as to what they should do. And when the NDP said, be shocked and appalled, they said, we're shocked and appalled. Hear, hear, they said. As the NDP said, hear, hear. So what happened, Mr. Speaker, was that this two-party coalition, this alliance, do I hear something from Cape Breton Centre? Carry on.
He's shocked, you're appalled.
All right. When the Conservatives had gotten their cue from the NDP, and they too were shocked and appalled, that pretty well brought the idea of an all-party committee to an end. But I want to tell you something, Mr. Chair, while I have the floor here. In the province of New Brunswick, where they have a Conservative government, they weren't nearly as averse to the idea of an all-party committee as they were here in Nova Scotia. And I have here in my hand a report from the all-party committee of the New Brunswick Legislative Assembly, dated to the Speaker of the House from Mr. Wally Stiles, MLA chairperson. And it's almost as long as the Dorsey report. It goes 55 pages of recommendations. And given the record of the Conservative Party on the Dorsey report of taking 1 year plus to carry out one recommendation, and I think there were over 50 recommendations in the Dorsey report, it would therefore take the Tories 50 years to carry that report's recommendations out. At a similar rate of progress, they could work through this report, if they had one here, at the rate of one per year, and by the year 2025 or perhaps 2050, they would be halfway through the report. They would be. That's where we could be if the government and the NDP had listened to the Liberals instead of listening to their own perverse inclinations. Now, Mr. Speaker, I see that the clock is quickly approaching the hour of 6 o'clock. And so we all have to await a future installment to continue